Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Hello, and a very warm welcome back to my 70s TV childhood. We are, I can safely say, one of the world's leading podcasts on what it was like to grow up as a child in 1970s Britain, with a special focus on the role that television played in our and our families' lives back then. In fact, we may be the only podcast which deals with this subject, so that may not be as great an accolade as it sounds. This week at my 70s TV childhood towers, we've been popping champagne corks and blowing those hooter things with a sort of rolled up tube that darts out when you blow into it. I've just realised I've never known the name of those things. Yes, we've been celebrating, as this is our 50th episode. It's our own little golden jubilee. Now, if you've been a really loyal listener and have listened to every episode, then I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also think, quite frankly, you deserve a medal for sitting through my and my guests' ramblings on growing up as a 70s child. If you're new to the show, thank you too. It's really great to have you on board as a listener. Before we launch into our landmark episode, I'd like to thank all of you who got in touch after our recent Trumptonshire episode. The response was greater than to any other episode we've released so far. I've received so many comments that I can't possibly mention everybody who's been in touch. On Facebook alone, the episode had 3,500 likes and well over 200 comments, so thank you to all for whom the episode brought back such happy memories. As well as our Facebook page at My 70s TV Childhood, you can also share your thoughts on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com. You can tweet at 70s TV Childhood, or you can email me, Oliver at my70stvchildhood.com. So, how to mark our 50th episode? Well, what better way than to travel back 50 years to July 1972 and remind ourselves as to what we, our families and friends were doing and what we were watching on television. For me, 1972 was quite a big year, as I started school in the January of that year, aged 4 years and 11 months old. I and my classmates in Mrs. Dutton's first year infants at Padgate Church of England Primary School had just started our journey into the big wide world. And yes, I have to admit I was already transfixed by the television and the wondrous window it gave us on a whole world of entertainment and adventure. Even if that window was still quite small and everything appeared in black and white, it was still something magical. So what was happening in Britain in 1972? Well, Ted Heath was Prime Minister. The National Union of Mine Workers went on strike, something which was to become a recurring theme in the next few years, which ultimately led to the 3-day week in 1973-4. Unemployment surged and reached levels not seen since the Depression of the 1930s. And in Northern Ireland, the Troubles took a deadly turn, with the Bloody Sunday shootings and a huge loss of life as violence escalated. In May, the Duke of Windsor, formerly King Edward VIII, died in Paris. And during the year, Britain also became home to thousands of Ugandan Asians who were expelled from the country by Idi Amin. So there was some pretty serious stuff going on in our country in 1972. But as a 5-year-old, I wasn't in the least bit aware of most of that. All that mattered to me was going to school, playing with my friends, and, of course, watching the television. So, what was on in 1972? Fortunately, I managed to get a copy of the Radio Times for early July, So I wonder what was keeping the British public entertained when, frankly, the outside world was full of doom and gloom. Let's have a look. Okay. Right, on Monday the 3rd of July, we start off at 9:20 on BBC One with one of my all-time favourites.
A town is full of buildings, some tall, some short, some wide, and some narrow. The buildings are flats and houses and factories and shops. They're built in streets. The streets have cars and buses and lorries driving along them. The cars and buses and the streets are full of people. In fact, there are a lot of people in a town. Do you live in a town? Mary, Mungo, and Midge live in this town. They live with Mary's mother and father in this tall block of flats. They live right at the top. There are 8 flats built on top of each other. Mary, Mungo, and Midge live in the flat with the flowers growing in the window box. There's Mary. There's Mungo. And there's Midge.
Mary, Mungo and Midge was a simple tale about a little girl called Mary, obviously, who lived at the top of a block of flats, in the one with the window box, together with her mother and father, her dog Mungo, and a mouse called Midge. I suppose it was meant to be inclusive of the whole generation of children who were growing up in the tower blocks of the 1970s. The storylines were gentle and involved some adventure where Mungo and Midge invariably save the day. My favourite sequence was when the trio of the title called the lift. Midge would sit on Mungo's nose and press the button. I never tired of this and thought it would be absolutely brilliant to have such clever pets and to live in a tower block so I could use a lift. Obviously, when in later life I first visited a tower block, the lift was out of order and I had to climb 12 flights of stairs, so the reality of tower block life struck home. But where Mary and her friends lived seemed idyllic. And probably the most remarkable thing about the programme is that it was hosted by Richard Baker, who at the time was the premier newsreader on BBC News. Can you imagine Hugh Edwards or Jon Snow narrating an under-5s animated TV show today? No, me neither. Anyway, back to the schedule. After Mary, Mungo and Midge, BBC One closed down until 12:55, when we had All in a Day's Work, Police, an episode of a documentary series narrated by Magnus Magnusson, which sounds very worthy and educational. 1972 was also the year that Magnus became a regular fixture on our screens when, in September, a new quiz show was launched on BBC One. More about Mastermind on another episode, I think. But here's a question for you. Which other long-running show began in 1972 and is still running today? Find out a bit later in this episode. At 1:30 we had Watch with Mother, featuring Pogleswood, another charming show from Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin. It was a lovely, slightly surreal programme set in a magical woodland glade where Mr. and Mrs. Pogle and their son Pippin had adventures together with Tog, who was a squirrel. Well, I think he was a squirrel, although he could have been a rabbit too. It was sort of striped as well. I presume he was a red squirrel, but I and all the other viewers, even those with a colour television, couldn't tell. because the series was made in black and white. And as a result of this, it was pensioned off by the BBC in 1973 and, quite tragically, has never been shown again. Okay, after Bogle's we've got a short news bulletin and then, guess what? Closed down? No. On this date, we had a rare example of afternoon programming, with Wimbledon 1972 taking up the afternoon until 10 to 5, when we get an episode of The Magic Roundabout. We've spoken several times about this show, so I won't add much, other than to say I am amazed to find it on at this time, as I always remember it being on in that 5-minute slot just before the early evening news, as featured in our episode 5-Minute Marvels. Okay, well, we've got Blue Peter next, and I'm pleased to say it features my presenter dream team of Valerie Singleton, John Noakes, Peter Purvis, and Leslie Judd. A combination which, in my opinion, cannot be beaten. We've also had an episode on this show, Get Down Shep, so if you want to hear more on Blue Peter, then have a listen. Well, what next then? At 5:20, we have The Perils of Penelope Pitstop, yet another show recently featured on this podcast. And there's also our next entry, Parsley the Lion, who's in the 5-minute slot before the news. Just thinking about this, have we been lucky in choosing subjects to discuss? Probably not, as I think what this tells me is there wasn't actually that much on, and that what there was often repeated, so these shows live on in my, and I'm sure many of your, memories. Right, back to the Radio Times. So we've got the news, local news programmes, and a bit of Nationwide with Michael Barrett, followed by more Wimbledon until 8 o'clock, when we start to get into the serious entertainment of the evening. Panorama was the heavyweight of cutting-edge documentary series, providing reporting, interviews and commentary on current affairs. Unfortunately, given the advanced publication date of the Radio Times, I have absolutely no idea what was featured on, what the date was it, Monday the 3rd of July 1972, but I'm sure it was something very important. This was then followed by the 9 o'clock news, read by Robert Dougal. Robert Dougal, I'd forgotten about him. Now, on reflection, he probably was numero uno in terms of newsreaders, with Mary Mungo and Midge star Richard Baker snapping at his heels to be top dog. I'd forgotten about him. Then after the news at 9:20, we've got a drama, Doom Watch Without the Bomb, which sounds like a barrel of laughs, to be honest. I don't remember this programme, but I'm sure somebody listening does, so I'd appreciate it if someone could fill me in on the plot. After a bit of doom and gloom, we were able to raise our spirits with the Spinners at 10:10. We've talked about the Spinners before, and we were all very proud of them in the Northwest when I was a child. We even had them visit our school for some reason, and... What? Oh, you're saying I've mentioned this before? Okay, yes, I really have mentioned this a number of times, so no more about the Spinners. I'm starting to act like the BBC in the 1970s, feeding you a diet of repeats. Anyway, with the Spinners' jolly tunes ringing in your ears, you could then watch 24 Hours with Ludovic Kennedy and Austin Mitchell, yet another news and current affairs programme. I have to say, the BBC really seemed to take its public broadcasting remit very seriously in those days. After Ludovic and Austin, we then had a documentary about the long jump with Ron Pickering in the run-up to the 1972 Olympics, until we had closed down at 11:40, the national anthem, a cup of Horlicks, and off to bed for Britain. That's it. The whole day's broadcasting amounting to Wimbledon, children's programmes, lots of news and current affairs, Doom Watch, and the Spinners. Oh, just a typical day on BBC One in 1972. I wonder what's happening on BBC Two. Let's have a look. BBC Two. Here we are. Right. So we've got Play School on 11 o'clock in the morning with Julie Stevens and Johnny Silvo. Sorry, Julie and Johnny, I'm not sure I remember you as presenters. You know, when you compare it against the likes of Brian Cant and so on, it's quite a hard act to be compared against. After Play School, we have a close down until 4:30 and more of Wimbledon 1972. At 7:30, we get yet another news bulletin for 30 minutes with, this time with the cracky-faced Peter Woods. Before, and this is a surprise, at 8 o'clock, we head off to the Wild West. The High Chaparral not only had a great theme tune, but also tended to be pretty well plotted, and featured a range of handsome stars from Leif Erikson as Big John to the rather racy Victoria played by Linda Crystal. The show was shot in gorgeous dramatic locations, and to be honest, I don't remember many of the plot lines. But let's have a look and see what the synopsis says for this episode. Okay. When Buck becomes the new owner of the saloon, he faces opposition in the town, every bit as warlike as that of hostile Indians. Only this time, the enemies are women. Okay, I'm not sure where to start analysing that plotline, which sits very awkwardly alongside our 21st century values, so, I don't think I will. At 10 to 9, we have a comedy play, His Lordship Entertains, written by and starring Ronnie Barker, and also featuring David Jason, amongst others. Now, that sounds like fun. Let's see what the Radio Times has to say. They say you're only as old as you feel, and Lord Rustless is no exception. When a well-endowed young lady arrives at Crome Hall Hotel, he is completely captivated. Well, I don't know what to say on this one either. I think it was L.P. Hartley in The Go-Between who said, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. And I think I'm starting to understand what he means by looking back at 1972. Anyway, going back to the Radio Times, after the hilarity of an old aristocrat chasing around a young, well-endowed lady, we get Horizon at 9:20 with a no doubt fascinating documentary about how muscles work in the human body. And then at 10:10, we've got some more Wimbledon, before we finish off the evening with some lively topical debate in Late Night Lineup with Joan Bakewell, Tony Bilbo and Sheridan Morley. And that's it. BBC Two shuts down before midnight too, and Britain's in bed. So that's our whistle-stop tour of the BBC's 1972 offering. What was happening on ITV, I wonder? So, I've put away my Radio Times, and I've been searching for the TV times for the same date, and what delights did the commercial channel hold for us on that day? Okay, well, we open up at 11:05 with Good Morning Boys, the Will Hay comedy film from 1937. I love that film, having seen it many times as a child. It's the one where Will Hay's a headmaster in a third-rate public school, and he and the boys get mixed up in a gold bullion robbery during a trip to Paris and get into shenanigans with the criminals, and I seem to remember it involves casts of the Eiffel Tower, that kind of thing. What do you mean that sounds like the plot of every Will Hay film? All right, okay, I'll move on. After that, we have Women Today, a topical women's discussion programme. And that's many decades before loose women was even thought about, so think on. And then we have Freud on food, with Clement Freud talking about, well, food, obviously. Although all I remember him for as a child is advertising dog food with a huge bloodhound called Henry. After this, at 1:10, we got Bellbird. Not one I remember. Oh, it's an Aussie soap opera set in the small town of Bellbird. How could I have missed that after our recent episode on how we saw Australia on 70s TV? And looking at the cast list, I think I recognise a few familiar names who went on to star in The Sullivans, The Young Doctors, and of course, Prisoner Cell Block H. Oh no, after Shaun the Leprechaun, which I don't remember either, at 22 we have Woobinda, Animal Doctor, and it's yet another Aussie import. And yet another one I missed out in our recent episode. Now, I do vaguely remember this one. It was a sort of cross between Skippy and The Outsiders, presenting a sort of slightly realistic, gritty view of life out in the bush in Australia, where a kind-hearted vet not only sorted out the animals' problems, but also those of their human companions. Lovely. And then at 2:05, we've got Castle Haven, a drama set in an apartment block dealing with the inhabitants' daily lives. Sounds interesting. I don't remember it, but it does star Kathy Staff, also of Crossroads, and later of Last of the Summer Wine. We got more chat at 2:30 in Good Afternoon, and then Racing from Newmarket at 3:00. And at 3:45, we have A Tale from the Pen of Edgar Wallace, which sounds a bit spooky for Monday afternoon, but never mind. And then we move into children's TV time. And at 20:05 is a show I'd long since buried in my memory. Until now.
This is Hatty Town, where all the people live in hats. This little boy with a great big hat on is Sancho. And this is Carrots, who is Sancho's very special friend. Today's story is called Mr. Wimple's Breakfast Rolls.
Hatty Town was exactly what it says on the tin. A town occupied by people who were hats, and who also lived in giant hats as well. It was also completely bonkers. Listening to that narration, I also don't remember it being quite so RP, where the narrator pronounces hat as if it's spelt H-E-T, het. Quite bizarre. And now I've rediscovered Hatty Town, I won't be able to forget it, however hard I might try. Already we can see that ITV's schedule was lighter, more varied, and actually a bit more fun than that offered by the BBC. Although some might say the combination of chat shows, imported Aussie stuff, and people who are hets might be considered a bit lightweight culturally, or am I in danger of overanalyzing this? Anyway, let's have a look what's next. After Hatty Town, we have Liftoff with Aisha, which was a really popular pop music focused show where all the top bands used to perform, well, mime their latest hits. After that, at 5:20, we've got Fly Into Danger, a drama set around an airfield in Kent. I don't remember it, but it hardly sounds like Arthur Haley's airport by that description. At 10:06, we got some chat and entertainment from the comedian John Junkin in Junkin. And then following a quick cartoon, we have this. I know we played this in our recent episode on Coronation Street and Crossroads, but I couldn't resist playing it again because it brings back so many memories. After Crossroads at 7, we have The Smith Family, a drama series about an American cop and his family, starring, believe it or not, the Oscar-winning Henry Ford, and including a young Ron Howard as one of Henry's kids. It looks like a pretty heavyweight cast, but I'm sorry, Henry, I've no memory of this show at all. At 7:30, we've got Coronation Street in its traditional Monday night spot. And then at 8, we have Cades County. It's another US cop show, but this time it's set in rural America and stars legendary Hollywood actor Glenn Ford as Sam Cade, the cop of the title. What was happening in the early 1970s that made famous screen actors like Henry Fonda and Glenn Ford to make formulaic cop shows for TV? I suspect it may have something to do with money. But then I think I am getting more cynical in my old age. Right, from US legal drama to one of our own at 9 p.m. when we get The Main Chance, starring John Stride as maverick lawyer David Main, who commutes between his twin bases in London and Leeds. His seemingly devil-may-care attitude is contrasted with the steady and cautious approach of his crusty Leeds partner, Henry Castleton, played by John Wentworth. However, Main's relentless pursuit of material and career success is tempered by his desire to champion the underdog, for whom he feels an occasionally grudging kinship. Well, that's what the TV Times said. I think I'd quite like to watch that. Suave, debonair lawyer, living the high life in London before coming home to feed his whippets in Leeds. I made that last bit up. At 10 o'clock, we've got ITV's flagship news programme, News at 10, with Sandy Gall and Reginald Bosanquet. And then off to the pub, probably. And then at 10:30, we have an hour in the company of New York's finest crooner, Tony Bennett. Before we round off the evening with a bit of professional wrestling, with the voice of wrestling, Kent Walton, at Halifax, for the mid-heavyweight clash between Mike Marino from London and Albert Ricky Wall from Doncaster. Who needed Sky Sports when that was on offer? Including little old ladies hitting the participants with their handbags, I seem to remember. I was quite surprised to see here that the wrestling was on several times a week, because as a child I only saw it on World of Sport on a Saturday, so never imagined it was on late at night and had an audience that watched it late at night. And so that brings us to the end of the day on ITV, and like all those watching BBC channels, it's all over before midnight, so decent folk can get to bed. It is a world away from what we have today, and looking back on the programming for a typical day in 1972, it does seem a bit tame. But try to remember that, as we said at the outset, this was a time where Britain was under strain, riven by industrial disputes, facing shortages, and really finding things tough. Television provided us, or I suppose more accurately our parents, with a way of escaping their troubles for an hour or two before having to face them again in the morning. In a bleak country, that flickering box in the corner of the living room was a very welcome distraction. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our brief trip back 50 years to 1972, and I hope you've enjoyed our 50th episode. Let me know on Facebook at My 70s TV Childhood. Visit our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com, tweet at 70s TV Childhood, or you can email me directly, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. Oh, and have you guessed what the other long-running show was that began in 1972? Yes, Emmerdale Farm, as it was first known, was first shown on the 16th of October 1972 and is still with us now, although a rather different show to that first episode dealing with Annie Sugden and her farmer's sons, where the biggest drama was something to do with a cow. Anyway, thanks for listening, whether this is your first episode or whether indeed it's your 50th. And join us again soon for more from my 70s TV childhood.